All right, I think we're about ready to get started. And yeah, sorry, audio guy, I am real loud. Thanks, man. All right, my name is Justin Richer, and lately I have been thinking a lot about clickers. Come on. Seriously. Sorry, one sec. I'm going to try that again. There we go. Lately, I have been thinking a lot Wow. All right, we're just going to do it this way. I have been thinking a lot about bubbles. And the reason for this is that our world is increasingly mobile. Things are changing all around us. And the context that we live in changes all the time. I might at one point be on a smartphone, and then on a laptop, and then from Wi-Fi to cell network to tablet to set-top device. And the security and sort of the overall view of who I am and what I'm doing changes with that context as I move through all of these different circumstances. And so that means that our identity needs to be robust in all of these different places. I need to be able to do the actions that I need to do across all of these different contexts in all of these different ways. And it needs to be flexible enough that it actually makes sense in each of those different spaces. And the solutions have to work through those contexts as the contexts change. It's not enough for us to come up with a solution that only works for the bit that we're in right now. We need to be able to think through things of like, what is this person going to deal with when they're disconnected, when they're reconnected, when they're off on a different network, when they're in a different circumstance and they need to do something else. All right, so let's take a look at a group of users. They're hanging out here, and they've got a bunch of applications that they need to be able to log into. This is a pretty straightforward thing. We've got some of the premier identity architects in the world sitting here in the room right now. So what we're going to do, well, we'll give them a password and let them log into all of their applications, and that'll be just fine, right? This actually does work. Works just fine, except that the picture actually looks a little bit more like this, because we're going to have users have different credentials on all of their different applications, and this gets unmanageable very quickly. It's 2024, though, and we can do better, right? We can create an identity provider that all of those people have an identity at, an account at, that we can give them access to these applications. We can manage the identities and the application access in different ways. So that works pretty well. So what if all these people are on a boat? And all of their applications are also on a boat? Well, we've kind of got the same situation that we started out with, right? We've got a bunch of people and a bunch of services that they need to use, and so we're going to give those people a bunch of accounts to connect all of those services. This is a pretty straightforward solution, but again, it's 2024. We can do better with this, so we are going to put an IdP on that boat with them. And now they can actually connect to that IdP with their applications, with their identities, and log into all of those systems, and everything works pretty well. Until whoever actually decided that all those people needed to go on that boat decides that, you know what, I want to centrally manage all of my accounts. I want to be able to know what's going on. I want to be able to provision people in a central way that says, like, yes, you are supposed to be on this boat doing these things at this time. And so I'm actually going to take the IdP off the boat, and I'm going to put it in someplace a lot more stable, because bad things can happen to boats. We don't want to lose an IdP. Those are expensive. So we're going to go put it over here. And this seems to work all well and good as long as the boat is plugged in. So here's the thing about boats. They move. And you might think, well, this is a pretty simple, straightforward problem, right? We'll just give them a wireless connection. And so these people will be able to bounce out to their IdP and back into all of the applications on their boat. And that works pretty well. And the latency might get a little iffy at times, but we built some robustness into the protocols, and it works well-ish for a while until it doesn't. And so at this point, we've now got a bunch of people and a bunch of applications. They have accounts, they have credentials, everything is set up, but they can't do anything. They can't reach anything because the essential piece of technology that they need to connect is off in the distance. They can't see it anymore. The reason for this is that the way that we view federation systems is in the light of an online and connected world. And that makes a lot of sense. This is the world that all of these technologies were built for. You can always reach back to a user's IdP in order to get a fresh assertion about who they are, get them logged in, and all of that stuff to be able to get into the applications. This is a perfectly reasonable assumption, unless you're on a boat. It starts to fall away at the edges of all of this sort of, semi-connected world that we're starting to talk about here. So how can we actually address this? Well, I've talked about this with folks for a couple years now, and this is the first question that people ask. What if we take our IDP and create a bunch of shards? So that IDP that's running back there, I'm going to say this is the gold source IDP. This has all of the account information across this environment. I'm going to make a whole bunch of copies of that IDP, and whoever needs to get a copy, I can issue them a copy of that IDP that they can go take into their disadvantaged environment. All of those accounts, we're going to provision them here and then hand you a copy and send you on your way. This seems to be a pretty good idea because at the time the boat is plugged in, we can download a copy of the IDP onto the boat and then they go set sail and everything still works. Right? It seems that we've got all of the best of all of these situations. The accounts are managed in a central place, but they still run. Everything still works when we are out floating on the water. And it gets even better because if we run into one of our peers and they have a copy of the same IDP, well, we can federate against each other because we all have the same trust domain. We can trust that their accounts are actually correct and they can connect into our systems because it's all the same set of accounts. This seems to work pretty well. And it also means that when we go back and plug back into the IDP, back at the dock again, we can make any updates to the system that we need to, including accounts that have been deprovisioned or anything like that that needs to happen. This seems pretty great. But I got a question for you. When I go and meet my peers out on the water, who has the gold source copy? Is it us? Did we update it the latest? Did they update it the latest? Do they have some local changes that we need to know about? Do they have some local changes that we don't want to know about? Things get messy really, really fast. And it gets even messier when you realize that you need to work with people that aren't always in the same security domain. Imagine federation across security domains. Like, it's unfathomable, right? Why would we invent this technology if we wanted to cross domains? So this is a really common situation where we're out in these disadvantaged networks, but there's another group there that we need to be able to work in. So we want to say, like, hey, you, come over to our boat. Now, her IDP is back on the orange boat. And since we're close enough, we can probably set up a link that, like, she can log in and she can access our stuff and we can sort of put her in a little, like, you know, federated domain access, and that works all pretty well until her IDP starts to float away. Because remember, boats, they move. And things start to, like, our assumptions about the connected nature of a federated system really start to fall over. So one thing that I've heard a lot of people say that they would do in this situation is like, oh, we'll just grab a copy of that other IDP and we'll download it to our system and we'll sync their entire directory into ours and that'll be great. Funny thing happens though, when you talk to those people that think that that's the best idea, all you got to do is ask them, okay, so you're also going to copy your directory into their system, right? So that it works in the other direction? Universally, you will get people to say, no, absolutely not. That is a terrible idea. It is a security risk. That is all personal information. No, I will not. And the thing is, though, like, there's a huge power imbalance that people assume is going to take place when you're connecting to this, right? But it gets even weirder. Because remember, back on that orange boat, we got one person that's not there anymore. So we want to say that anybody accessing her account shouldn't actually be accessing her account. So we've effectively disabled that account here. But if we were getting our account information from that IDP right now, she wouldn't be able to access any of our systems either. And that context doesn't make any sense. So what we're probably going to do is create a local account. And then that actually gives us all of the properties that we need. She can log into the IDP, access the applications, and all that works really well. And so we sail along with her on board, and we meet somebody who's having a very bad day. And we decide we're going to take this person on board because their day is just going to get worse if we don't. And this is a person that came on board that we didn't have a pre-existing trust relationship with. Perhaps that orange boat, we knew who they were. We could verify where those people are coming from and the types of things that we wanted to do. But the person coming off of this sinking sailboat, we just fished them onto the water. And it's like, you know what, get on here, figure that out. But you're on board, you probably need to be able to access some things, to be able to get around. You're part of the ship and part of the crew, right? And why not? Why wouldn't we be able to do sort of a local vetting for limited access? The captain should be able to turn to this person and be like, hey, new guy, lube the conniption pins and give me a tuna fish sandwich, right? You should be able to be part of the active working piece of that ship because they're there. And lots of strange things happen on the seas that we need to account for. This is not an event that we're going to pre-provision before we leave dock. But now we've got a person that we need to be able to write down the fact that their account status has been audited. And so we now have a very unique, very contextual view of what the world looks like just because we've been out there existing in the world. And so when we go back and plug into our IDP, what's going to happen? Is it all going to get overwritten? That's what the sharding policy says. Since we're just a copy of that, we're now an aberrant copy, and we need to be overwritten. We have a bunch of bad data that needs to be corrected, except that our data is actually more correct for us because we have the additional context. And when we meet our peers floating out on the water, we've got a very different view of that piece of the world, of our copy, from what they have. Who's got the right copy? The shard approach assumes that there is a central source of truth that just needs to be replicated. It's a replication problem. And all of like the blockchainy hash graph people have probably been thinking like, oh, I can replicate your nodes real fast. It'll be really great. We've got consensus protocols and all that. But in order to be able to do that, you need to ask the question, what is the source of truth that you're replicating throughout this network? But I want to ask a different question. Is there a source of truth? Is there a single source of truth for these sets of accounts that makes sense for everywhere? And the more I've been thinking about it, the more I don't think that there is. And that in fact, we need to really start rethinking how we look at federation and how we look at accounts and access. And not just on boats. There's all sorts of situations where we're moving across network boundaries where this type of thing comes into play. So, bubbles. If we take that entire network and we place it inside of a bubble, conceptually, we have now created a standalone environment where there's a distinct boundary to it. Inside that bubble, we've got a cohesive system. We've got sets of accounts. Some are local, some come from outside, some come from other systems. We've got sets of applications and access rights. Inside that bubble, we're still using federation technologies. We're still using things like WebAuthn for local access. We're still using all sorts of really powerful stuff. But we're using it inside, and we're taking a very different approach about how we cross the boundaries, both inbound and outbound from this internally cohesive system. So let's say that we've got a user that's come in from a trusted authority, somebody that was on the manifest of that boat before it left dock. Well, we want to be able to write down that, hey, that person actually came in on that boat. They're supposed to be here. Here's their credentials. Here's everything they're supposed to be able to do. And we need to be able to do that in a way that we can actually write down how that happened and enter that into the bubble. The difference here, though, is that we're not just taking a copy of that IDP and saying, like, oh, this is now our copy of that IDP. We have our own environment into which we are provisioning a bunch of accounts and authenticators and access and information into our local system that we can now reason about separately. And that means that we can repeat that same pattern on a whole bunch of different bubbles, which feels a lot like I just reinvented shards and gave it a different name. But I'm not that good of a marketer, I swear. The real key here is that every single bubble is unique. We're not treating these as copies of a single central source of truth. We're treating these as completely separate environments that have things that come in from the outside. So that means when we need to make a new local account, and as we just saw floating around, we've got a lot of reasons to make a new local account, we can do that. And now it's just another account in the system, but it's one that has a set of attributes associated with it about where it came from. So instead of coming from a trusted authority, we say this is just some dude we fished out of the water. We can have flags for that tell us where this account came from and how much we should really trust it, or any of the information in it. Because we don't want to trust those accounts in the same exact way. We don't want to treat them the same way. And when we need to write down that somebody's account has been audited, we can do that locally in a way that makes sense for us in our context. Right? We can change the attributes locally, and we're not changing like our view of some central truth. We are changing our own truth that is centered on us. The bubble creates a well-defined boundary. inside of which we have local identities and local decisions that we can actually work on. Also, because we can do this in a lot of different ways, that means we have a whole lot of bubbles. And that's where things start to get really fun. Because you get a lot of bubbles together, a lot of bubbles make foam. And foam is a fascinating substance. It's a fascinating construct because you've got all of these little individual ecosystems that are floating around. They run into each other, they separate, they connect, they reconnect. And this changes over time, but you expect it to change over time. You expect to be able to move through this environment in a way that changes and flows as needs change throughout all of your different circumstances. So that means that when we run into our peers and we have very different views of the world, well, we actually expect that now. This is no longer an aberrant condition because now they may have an updated piece of information about one of our provisioned accounts from a trusted authority. We can actually take that into advisement. We can actually take that update and say like, oh yeah, such and such has these set of rights because I can verify that it came from there. Maybe it's coming in through VCs or certs or some other technology that lets me do that. But the thing is, we're no longer fighting about who has the right copy because we both have the right copy for each of our individual environments. Which means that when we go talk to somebody who's not from the same exact authority, well then we expect them to have their own environment. We expect them to be different. We expect them to have a different set of accounts, and we can now start to talk about how we get somebody from that environment into ours. Because guess what? We can use a federated transaction or a VC or anything like that that brings a set of credentials and a set of attributes over the wire from an authority that we have decided that we are going to trust in these circumstances. And we can pull that in and create an account with an authenticator that we can verify locally inside of our system. And importantly, we can write down where they came from. Because they're not coming from our trusted authority back on the dock, they are coming from this peer. And that means we now have a way to express a truly decentralized, mutually limited trust between these different bubble environments. Because they have a set of accounts and we have a set of accounts. And I no longer need them to download their entire IDP, nor do I have to expect to have to download my entire IDP into their systems in order to make this thing work. We can make the connections that we need to when we touch. And then when we disconnect, it still works. Because we're not going out to that IDP every time, because the account that we create is localized to our bubble, but it's fed by that initial connection with that remote system, with that other bubble. Every account in this is local, fundamentally local to the bubble, no matter where it started out. But importantly, it carries a lot of local provenance, because I need to write down where I got all of these attributes, where I got all of this information, right? Because then, when we reconnect, I can now actually report back and say, like, hey, that person that I onboarded from you, they did a bunch of stuff. Thought you might want to know about it. We've heard a lot about, CAPE and shared signaling and stuff like that, and that has all been largely written for an asynchronous type of conversation, the kind of thing that you might have about an account based on an identifier that somebody else told you over time. Really powerful way to connect this kind of stuff. But importantly, we also, within our bubble, have the capability to assert outbound into other bubbles. We are our own trust root of authority out to other systems. In other words, we're looking at federation not as an authentication technology, but fundamentally as a provisioning technology, as a synchronization and management technology when we can. And then we tie that to authentication against other authentication-based technologies when we need it. This also means that since we're writing down so much information, we can audit against an authority or really multiple authorities, because that peer is an authority for some subset of accounts that we've got in our system. We've probably also got that authority back at the dock and maybe somebody else that we need to talk to about some set of operations that happened while we've been floating around. We need to tell somebody that we picked somebody up off of a sinking sailing boat. Everything that I've been talking about today, this is not fiction. All of the parts we need to build out a bubble exist. We have IDPs. We have trust root management. We've got verifiers. We've got all of the bits and pieces to connect things together. And I've been working with Uber Ether to actually build out prototypes of this across different environments so that we can really get our hands on what this type of system would actually look like. But I am fully convinced that there is not a bubble protocol. There's not like a single stack that's going to solve all of these problems. The world is heterogeneous. We have to assume that heterogeneity when we connect things. Open standards give us a way to connect things, but I deliberately did not draw this all the same arrow. Because this isn't all just, oh, if we apply OpenID Connect, it'll solve everything. Or we put everybody on the same blockchain, it'll solve... Sorry, I couldn't even finish the sentence. And there's a lot of different bits and pieces. And the thing is, somebody's going to roll up on a boat that's still running SAML. And you're going to want to talk to them sometimes. And you need to deal with that, right? But somebody else is going to come up on their yacht that's, running DIDs for some forsaken reason. And you'll be able to, with an environment that assumes this heterogeneity, make the connections that make the most sense for your context, because what you're doing is you're drawing a very clear boundary around you and saying, these are the ways that I connect in, and these are the ways that I connect out. And that's how you start to build a global scale interoperability between systems like this. It's not a single tech stack that will always connect to every other bubble. It's a bunch of different systems that use the same pattern that allow us to bring things together. Because when we're building this out, we need to build everything in layers, connect with standards, and particularly open standards. And most importantly, embrace the diversity that's out there in this world. I see so many technologists that say, like, oh, well, if everybody ran my protocol, it would all just work. Well, I mean, it might, but that's never going to happen. Everybody's never going to run one protocol. That's just not going to happen. Like, we can't even get data centers to all run HTTP these days. We've got Kafka and all of this other crazy stuff, right? Like, I thought that, as a technologist, I thought that problem was solved years ago, but absolutely not. In closing, when we look at these disadvantaged environments and getting these accounts around, a lot of people think about shards, but I don't like that. Shards are sharp, they're jagged, they're stabby. Bubbles, on the other hand, they're flexible, they protect, they wrap you around. And so if you ask me, the future, especially the future that I want to see, is in bubbles. Thank you all very much. I'm not sure how we're doing on time. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Yes?
So you said that you have implemented that with Uber Ether.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get out of the analogy and can you give us a little bit of details onto like a reuse case that you have attached?
Yeah, so the question was about the actual implementation. What we've done is we've taken a couple of Keycloak servers and a couple of sort of external IDPs. I think we've got ping and auth lead and a couple of things. And, oh, that's okay. They're all just going to keep talking. They're done listening. It's fine. I'm just going to sit up here and make fun of them because it's actually still my time. But in any case, no, what we've done is we've taken a couple of Keycloak servers and built them in such a way that you actually use federation to onboard the account, but you immediately bind a WebAuthn credential in our case. And from that point, we technically have an IDP that we could then express outbound. The pieces that we really don't have built out yet in our test environment are the type of like, I'm just going to show up to a random other bubble and be able to broadcast that, hey, I have an account that you could use. Because the type of federation that you do inbound to applications is going to be very different from the type of federation that you're doing across boundaries. And that's something that like current tech stacks don't really have that level of separation. We've tried doing it with Keycloak Realms, I think they're called, and ran into some walls there. We've tried doing it with I forget which ping product we built out, but there's like a federated auth inbound thing. It didn't quite do what we were looking for. So I think that there's a lot of glue that needs to be built. I don't think the protocols actually need to be invented for most of this. I think it's the assumptions around the protocols and what those protocols mean. That's where that glue really comes into place. The orchestration, yeah. But importantly, it's orchestration on a per environment basis. And getting away from this mindset of there is a global orchestration that I need to do the same way for everything. Yeah.
So, how do you deal, I love there is no single source of truth, but what if two equally trustworthy sources of truth give you different information about the person? How do you do synchronization, conflict resolution?
So the question was, what if you have two equally trustworthy sources of truth give you different stories? Well, same thing we do any other time we do that. First, I have to figure out that they're talking about the same person. Because fundamentally, what you've just told me is that there are two different accounts that want to come in and give me information. I could just, very simply, treat them as two very different people inside. That's probably not what we want. We probably want to do resolution and linking. But then that becomes a local policy for us to say, like, oh, we've got this set of attributes over here and this set of attributes over here. I need to reconcile that some way. I don't think there's going to be a universal way to do that, but I think that there's going to be a lot of sort of programmable policy and sort of, heuristic data munging type of stuff that's going to help with that. Or talk to the person. Well, I mean, yeah, if you just fish someone off of their sailing boat, then that's your only source of attributes. And often, honestly, that's good enough. It's good enough for a tuna fish sandwich.
So this is super cool. Just a cool mental model. I think the reason no one's doing it this way is because it's hard enough to do it the easy, normal way. Normal. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do you continue to make the case that this is a cool way of thinking about the provenance of not just accounts but also attributes, pieces of information?
Great question. So to repeat that, people are probably not doing this because it's hard enough to do it the easy way, and this is harder. And how do we move beyond even just prototypes to do this? I think that one of the key things is going to be getting building blocks that don't have such strict assumptions built in, and that's one of the things that we're working on in our prototype, is trying to break away from that notion of, like, if you're federating in, you're always federating in. What I really want is an account where I federate in the first time, I'm logging in locally, and then, hey, after a while, can I ping that IDP? Oh, I can. I'm going to send you out to make sure that that's still there. Or I'm going to get a shared signal reply or something like that. Again, we've got all of the bits and pieces to make this happen. The real key is going to be when we start thinking about these, particularly these disadvantaged environments, as their own cohesive systems. And I think that there's a lot of hesitance to do that because of the thing that I had way back at the beginning where it was a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of keys just to get at a couple set of applications. Because that's what people think of when they think of a disadvantaged environment, right? It's like, oh, I have to do everything locally. You go out to disaster recovery or rural search and rescue or something like that. Somebody rolls up, what you do? You hand them a sticky note that has their username and password. They didn't pick either of them. And it's just like, oh, this is you, this is your account. What was your name? Got it. And you go off because that person has better things to do than to pick a password. And, like, we don't want to do that. Like, that solves the disconnected problem, but it creates a whole bunch of other problems. The thing is, we've got so many technologies that can help augment that process, so it's still person shows up, provides credential, gets account, can go on with their life, except that now, okay, either I hand them a YubiKey, or they hand me one, and we plug it in, they push the button, and now that's all associated with the thing. We've deployed systems like that in various active military zones. I forget when it was, but I know that there were crates of pre-provisioned YubiKeys that got shipped out to Ukraine. And that works really well for that piece. The problem is that that now gets treated entirely as within that system, and it never goes out. So to me, that's the next step. is getting away from this hierarchical thinking of there is an account that propagates downward out through all of these systems. That's the shard approach. There is a source of truth, and it replicates. But instead, we really need to get to this, sort of point-to-point connection system. And I think building out the pieces that allow us to set those up, set that kind of environment up, in even limited protocol spaces, is going to go a very, very long way to making this make sense. Yes?
So obviously the idea behind the bubbles is to provide a lot of flexibility and a lot of independence and customizability. So I'm operating my bubble. It seems to me though that, and I want to be able to develop a story. The longer I've got an identity operating in my bubble in this sphere, I've got a whole story that's building up. I've got some behaviors. I've got some ins and outs and stuff like that. So the next time, and I've built up this whole provenance and additional behaviors. And then I bump into the next bubble that wants to share information, and they also have a history and a story about this particular identity. What is the shared language in the absence of a protocol, single protocol? How are they going to say, hey, I've got, here's what they've been up to, and these kind of behaviors we're expecting, and these are outside of the normal range. And my second question is,
Okay.
Don't you end up with like a lot of overhead? So now all of a sudden, this story is going to take up space.
Yes. Fantastic question. So the questions were in two parts, going to summarize very, very succinctly. How do we talk about sort of that provenance, that history, especially when we're talking about the same entity between two different bubbles? And doesn't that sort of build up cruft over time and just like sit around, capture all history for all time, for all actions, something like that. The second question is actually a little bit easier. I think that's a data management problem. I think that's, we can do some really interesting things with sort of effectively lossy compression of the history. We can pull out salient points, and I don't need to know every single action if they're all normal type of stuff, right? It's an interesting problem. I am not the expert on this. The other thing is, how do we talk about it? I think we're having the first parts of that conversation today with the shared signals world. So the story of events on accounts and events on sessions are the first part of this. But I think that events on actions, behaviors over time, trends, I think we don't quite have the protocol or vocabulary for that. Ultimately, in corollary to that, what happens if the way that you tell that story doesn't match the way that I tell that story? Well, we might not be able to communicate that piece. And I think that that's actually something that we kind of need to expect in this system, that sometimes there's going to be information that's not a direct good fit between these two sides. And the reasoning for that is that it's going to be coming from different places and from different contexts. And even if we did speak the same protocol, your context might not make any sense to me. Like, what on earth is getting auditored? What does that mean? It's the whole data ontology question is like a huge, huge area of academic research. I don't know what the latest is on that. I think that might be part of it. But I think that it's going to be imperfect. It's going to be partial. And I think that we're going to have systems that are going to need to be robust against that type of partial and imperfect information and still be able to make sense. All right. I think that guy's just talking with his hands. Yeah. Okay. Didn't know if you had a question. All right. Thank you guys very much for coming, and have a good rest of your Identiverse.